Welcome back. You are listening to the home of forbidden romances. Prepare yourself, because tonight's story will leave you breathless. The sterile air of the pediatric ICU shattered instantly, not by the sound of a dropped scalpel or a crying child, but by the sheer, crushing weight of a presence that sucked the oxygen right out of the room. Julian froze, his hand hovering over the feverish forehead of his 3-year-old son, Leo. He didn't need to turn around to know who had just walked through the double doors. His body betrayed him first. A shiver, primal and terrified, raced down his spine, and the scent, that distinct, overpowering blend of storm rain, expensive cognac, and burnt cedar, flooded his senses, burying the smell of antiseptic. It was a biological imperative, a chemical reaction he had spent 3 years running from. The heart monitor beside Leo's bed picked up speed, a frantic beep 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 that mirrored the rabbit-quick thudding in Julian's own chest. He slowly withdrew his hand, his fingers trembling, and turned. They were there, all 3 of them, standing shoulder to shoulder, blocking the exit like the gods of a forgotten, violent pantheon, stood the Blackwood triplets. They wore suits that cost more than the hospital wing they were occupying, tailored to fit broad shoulders and lean, predatory frames. In the center was Varian, the eldest by minutes, his eyes like chips of glacial ice, cold and calculating. To his right stood Kale, the volatile enforcer, his jaw clenched so hard a muscle feathered beneath the skin, his fists balled at his sides. And to the left was Dorian, the deceptive diplomat, wearing a soft, terrifyingly polite smile that didn't reach his dark, obsessive eyes. "We found you," Varian said. His voice wasn't loud, but it possessed a terrifying gravity, the kind of alpha command that made Julian's knees want to buckle against his will. "And to think, you almost got away with stealing our heir." "I didn't steal him," Julian whispered, his body instinctively shifting to shield the sleeping toddler behind him. "I saved him." Kale stepped forward, his movement sudden and violent, only to be halted by Varian's raised hand. "Saved him?" Kale snarled, the sound vibrating in the low register. "You took him. You vanished. You made us tear the world apart, brick by brick, looking for a ghost. Do you have any idea what you've done, Julian?" "I did what I had to do," Julian retorted, though his voice lacked the steel he hoped for. "He was sick. He needed a specialist. I couldn't treat him in hiding anymore. So you came to the one hospital in the state funded by the Blackwood Corporation," Dorian noted, his voice silky and dangerous. He stepped closer, ignoring Julian's flinch, and reached out to tuck a stray lock of hair behind Julian's ear. His fingers were hot, branding. "Careless, my little dove. Or perhaps, you wanted to be caught. I wanted him to live." Julian snapped, slapping Dorian's hand away. The sound echoed in the room. Silence descended, heavy and suffocating. No one touched the Blackwood alphas. No one defied them. Varian's gaze shifted from Julian to the small, pale boy hooked up to the IVs. The ice in his expression fractured, just for a second, revealing a depth of pain that stole Julian's breath. "Is he?" "Leukemia," Julian choked out, the fight draining from him. "Acute. He needs a bone marrow transplant. I'm not a match." I didn't know where else to go." Varian nodded once, sharply. The decision was made. "Pack his things." "What?" Julian blinked. "We are leaving," Varian commanded, checking his watch. "The helicopter is on the roof. We have a private medical facility at the estate. Better doctors. Better security." "I'm not going back there," Julian said, backing up until his legs hit the mattress. "I won't let you lock me up again. Take Leo if you must. Save him, but let me go." Kale let out a dark, humorless laugh. He closed the distance in 2 strides, gripping Julian's chin and tilting his head back, forcing eye contact. "Let you go? You think this is about custody, Julian? You think we just want the boy?" Kale leaned down, his lips brushing the shell of Julian's ear, his whisper a promise of ruin. "We aren't just taking the boy. We're taking you. You belong to us. You always have. And this time, we're never letting the door unlock." The flight to the Blackwood estate was a blur of rotor noise and suffocating tension. Julian sat clutched in the leather seat, Leo asleep in his lap, hooked up to a portable monitor. Across from him sat the triplets, 3 pairs of eyes dissecting him, devouring him. Julian looked out the window at the sprawling city lights below, his mind racing back to the beginning. It had been a fairy tale, or so he thought. He was a scholarship student. They were the scions of the city's most powerful dynasty. Their courtship had been intense, overwhelming. He had fallen for the distinct duality of them: Varian's protective stability, Kale's fiery passion, Dorian's intellectual charm. When he became pregnant, he thought his life was complete. Until that night in the library. He had been bringing tea to Varian's study. The door was ajar. He heard Varian on the phone, his voice cold and detached. Asterisk, the contract is solid. Once the heir is born, the lineage is secure. The carrier is irrelevant. We do what is necessary for the family name. Asterisk, the carrier. Irrelevant. The words had shattered Julian's world. He realized, with a sickening jolt, that he wasn't a partner. He was an incubator, a means to an end for a powerful triad that needed a legacy. Panic, irrational and all-consuming, had seized him. He didn't wait for an explanation. He didn't wait to be discarded or paid off. He ran. He disappeared into the underground, using suppressants to mask his scent, working cash jobs, moving every 3 months. He had raised Leo in cramped apartments and drafty trailers, telling him stories of 3 kings who lived in a glass castle. He had been free, but he had been lonely, and he had been poor. And now he was back. The helicopter touched down on the private helipad of the Blackwood estate. The wind whipped Julian's coat around him as the doors opened. Medical staff were already waiting, a seamless, high-tech swarm that took Leo from his arms with gentle efficiency. Where are they taking him? Julian panicked, trying to follow the stretcher. To the medical wing, Varian said, his hand clamping onto Julian's shoulder like a vice. He will be prepped for testing immediately. We need to see which of us is the best donor match. I need to be with him, Julian pleaded. You need, Dorian interjected, stepping up on his other side, to be processed. Processed, Julian recoiled. Cleansed, Kale clarified, looming behind him. You smell like poverty, fear, and cheap suppressants. It's offending my nose. They marched him not to the guest quarters, but to the master suite, the sprawling penthouse floor that the 3 brothers shared. It was just as he remembered: floor-to-ceiling windows, dark mahogany, velvet, and the lingering, intoxicating scent of them. Strip, Varian ordered, closing the heavy oak doors and locking them. The click of the lock sounded like a gunshot. Julian crossed his arms over his chest. No, Varian sighed, unbuttoning his suit jacket and tossing it onto a leather armchair. He loosened his tie, his gaze weary but burning. Julian, don't make this difficult. You have been living in squalor. You are malnourished. You are stressed. And you reek of beta blockers that are slowly poisoning your system. I did what I had to survive you, Julian spat. To survive us? Dorian asked, tilting his head. He walked over to the minibar and poured a glass of amber liquid. Did we beat you? Did we starve you? You used me. Julian cried out, the 3 years of suppressed heartache finally erupting. I heard you, Varian. In the study. You called me a carrier. You said I was irrelevant once the heir was born. The silence that followed was absolute. Varian froze, his hands on his belt buckle. Kale, who had been pacing like a caged tiger, stopped dead. Dorian set the glass down so hard the stem cracked. Varian turned slowly. Is that why you ran? Because of a phone call. I wasn't going to wait around for you to take my baby and throw me in the trash, Julian said, tears stinging his eyes. I loved you. All of you. And I was just a contract to you. Kale let out a roar of frustration, grabbing a vase from a side table and hurling it against the wall. It shattered, shards of porcelain raining down. You idiot, Kale shouted, turning on Julian. You absolute, catastrophic idiot. Kale, Varian warned, but his voice was shaking. No. Kale stormed over to Julian, grabbing him by the shoulders. He needs to know. You think you were a contract? That phone call. Varian was talking to the board of directors. They wanted to force a marriage arrangement with the Voronov family. Varian told them the lineage was secure with you, so they would back off. He called you irrelevant to them, meaning your background didn't matter because you were carrying the heir and you were ours. Julian blinked, the air leaving his lungs. What? Dorian stepped forward, his face pale. We were planning the engagement, Julian. We had the ring. Varian was fighting off the board to make sure no one could challenge your position as our consort. We were trying to protect you. And then you vanished, Varian whispered, the ice in his eyes melting into a raw, bleeding wound. We came to your room, and you were gone. The nursery was empty. Varian walked over, his dominance stripped away, leaving only a man who had been grieving for 3 years. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, velvet box. He tossed it onto the bed. It bounced once and fell open. Inside sat a platinum band, intricately set with 3 rare diamonds, 1 blue, 1 red, 1 black. We didn't want you for the baby, Varian said hoarsely. We wanted the baby because it was part of you. Julian stared at the ring. The world tilted on its axis. The fear, the running, the poverty. It had all been a mistake? A misunderstanding fueled by insecurity and a fragmented conversation? Julian stammered. I didn't know. You didn't ask, Cale growled, though his grip on Julian's shoulders softened into a desperate caress. You just left us. You broke us, Julian. We searched every day, Dorian whispered, standing close enough that Julian could feel his body heat. Do you know what it's like? To have your mate sever the bond? To feel that void? We went mad. We nearly destroyed the company. We destroyed our enemies just to vent the rage. And every night, we went to sleep in a cold bed, wondering if you were dead or if you just hated us. Julian's legs gave out. He sank to the floor, burying his face in his hands. The weight of his mistake was crushing. He had deprived Leo of a father, 3 fathers. He had lived in fear of monsters that didn't exist. I was so scared, Julian sobbed. I just wanted to protect him. He felt them descend. They didn't stand over him. They knelt. Varian was the first, pulling Julian's hands away from his face. Look at me. Julian looked. He saw the exhaustion in Varian's eyes, the gray hairs that hadn't been there 3 years ago. We are angry, Varian said, his thumb stroking Julian's cheekbone. We are furious that you ran, that you put yourself and our son in danger. But, he leaned in, pressing his forehead against Julian's. We are so relieved you are alive. I'm sorry, Julian wept. I'm so sorry. Shoo. Dorian soothed, wrapping his arms around Julian's waist from the side. We have time. We have forever to fix this. But first, you need to be clean. You need to smell like us again. The following week was a blur of medical anxiety and suffocating intimacy. Leo's treatment began immediately. Cale was the best match for the marrow transplant. The procedure was grueling, but successful. Julian spent his days in the sterile suite holding Leo's hand, watching the color slowly return to his son's cheeks. But he was never alone. The triplets rotated. There was always one of them in the room. A hand on his back. A coffee placed in his palm. A body sleeping in the chair next to him. They were reclaiming him, inch by inch. When Leo was finally stable enough to be moved to the recovery wing of the estate, the real reckoning began. Julian was in the master bedroom, staring out at the rain-lashed gardens. The door clicked shut. He turned to find all 3 of them there. The air pressure in the room dropped. Leo is asleep, Varian said, loosening his tie. The nurses are with him. He's going to be okay, Julian said, a small smile touching his lips. Thank you. For everything. He is our son, Cale said, leaning against the doorframe, crossing his powerful arms. You don't thank us for saving our own blood. Now, Dorian said, walking over to the bed and sitting on the edge. He patted the space beside him. Come here, Julian. Julian hesitated, then walked over. He didn't sit. He stood before them, feeling like he was facing a tribunal. We need to discuss the future, Varian said, stepping closer. You ran because you felt powerless. Because you thought you were a pawn. Yes, Julian admitted. That changes now, Varian declared. We aren't just alphas. We are a pack. And a pack cannot function if the heart is missing. Cale moved behind Julian, his chest pressing against Julian's back, his arms caging him in. You aren't leaving this house again, Julian. Not without one of us. Not ever. Is that a threat? Julian asked, his breath hitching as Cale nuzzled his neck, inhaling deeply. It's a fact, Cale growled. But not because you're a prisoner. Because we are never giving you a reason to run again. Dorian stood up and took Julian's hand, pressing a kiss to the pulse point of his wrist. We will transfer ownership of the West Wing properties to your name tomorrow. You will have your own accounts. You will have a seat at the table. Julian looked at Varian. The stoic leader nodded. Power. security, equality. If that is what you need to believe us, you have it. I don't need the money, Julian whispered. Then what do you need? Varian asked, his voice raw. I need to know that if I stay, it's because you love me. Not the boy. Me. Varian closed the distance. He grabbed Julian by the lapels of his shirt and kissed him. A searing, possessive, desperate kiss that tasted of years of starvation. It wasn't gentle. It was acclaiming. It was a declaration of war against anyone who would ever try to separate them again. When they broke apart, Varian was breathless. Does that answer your question? Julian nodded, dizzy. Good. Cale rumbled against his neck. Because we have 3 years of missed nights to make up for. The reconciliation was not a gentle affair. It was a storm. That night, the boundaries of the bedroom ceased to exist. It was a tangle of limbs and skin, of desperate confessions murmured against sweat-slicked skin. They worshipped him, not as a delicate flower, but as a survivor who had returned from the war. Varian took him with a slow, grinding intensity that demanded total submission. Cale took him with a frantic, bruising passion that sought to erase every memory of the years apart. And Dorian unraveled him with whispers and slow touches that made Julian scream his name. In the aftermath, lying in the center of the massive bed, tangled in silk sheets and heavy alpha limbs, Julian felt the knot of fear in his chest finally loosen. Cale was asleep with his head on Julian's chest. Dorian was draped over his legs. Varian was awake, watching him in the dim light. You're thinking, Varian murmured. I'm thinking about Leo, Julian whispered. He's going to grow up here. With all of you. He will be a king, Varian promised. And you will be the one who rules us. Julian smiled, closing his eyes. The cage was gilded, yes. The walls were high. But for the first time in 3 years, he didn't want to climb over them. He was home. But peace is a fragile thing in the world of the Blackwoods. 2 weeks later, Julian was in the garden, watching Leo play with a new puppy Cale had brought home. The sun was shining, casting long shadows across the perfectly manicured lawn. He didn't hear the footsteps until it was too late. Touching scene, a voice sneered. Julian spun around. Standing by the hedges wasn't one of the triplets. It was an older man, leaning on a cane, flanked by 2 armed guards. He had Varian's eyes, but they were devoid of any humanity. Silas Blackwood, the estranged patriarch. The man Varian had exiled years ago. You must be the little runaway, Silas said, stepping onto the grass. My sons have gone soft, letting a whore back into the house, and bringing a sickly mongrel with him. Julian stepped in front of Leo, his heart hammering. Get out. Varian will kill you if he finds you here. Varian is busy dealing with the fire I just set at the downtown warehouse. Silas smiled, showing yellowed teeth. He's distracted, which leaves me just enough time to fix his mistake. He signaled to the guards. Grab the boy. Dispose of the parent. Julian didn't think. He didn't plead. He reacted. He grabbed a pair of heavy gardening shears from the bench beside him. As the first guard reached for him, Julian drove the blades down into the man's thigh. The guard screamed, buckling. Run, Leo. Run to the house. Julian screamed. Leo froze, terrified. The second guard lunged. Julian swung the shears, but the guard caught his wrist, twisting it. The metal clattered to the grass. A heavy hand struck Julian across the face, sending him sprawling. Silas laughed, a dry, rattling sound. Pathetic. The guard raised a pistol, aiming it at Julian's head. Julian squeezed his eyes shut, bracing for the end. Bang. The sound was deafening. But Julian didn't feel the bullet. He opened his eyes. The guard dropped to his knees, a hole in the center of his forehead, before falling face first into the turf. At the edge of the terrace, smoke curling from the barrel of a long-range rifle, stood Dorian. And he wasn't smiling. Behind him, sprinting across the lawn with a speed that defied physics, were Varian and Cale. They were monsters unleashed. Varian reached the second guard, the one clutching his leg, and didn't even slow down. He kicked the man in the head with a sickening crack, silencing him instantly. Cale didn't stop for the guards. He went straight for Silas. The patriarch tried to raise his cane, but Cale hit him like a freight train. They went down in a heap of expensive fabric and rage. Cale was on top of him in a second, his hands around the old man's throat. I told you. Cale roared, his face twisted into a mask of pure fury. I told you if you ever stepped foot near them, I would rip your heart out. Kale, Varian barked, pulling Julian up from the ground and checking him frantically for injuries. Don't kill him. Not yet. Give me one reason. Kale snarled, tightening his grip. Silas was turning purple, clawing uselessly at Kale's wrists. Because, Julian said, his voice trembling but loud. Kale froze, looking back at Julian. Julian wiped blood from his lip where he'd been hit. He walked over to where Kale held the old man pinned. Julian looked down at Silas Blackwood, the man who had terrorized his sons, who had tried to kill a child. Because, Julian said coldly, death is too easy. Varian stepped up beside Julian, wrapping an arm around his waist. He's right. Killing him ends his suffering. We have the basement. We have time. Kale's grin was terrifying. He released Silas's throat, only to deliver a knockout blow to the temple. The basement it is. Dorian arrived a moment later, scooping a sobbing Leo into his arms. He looked at the carnage, then at Julian. Are you hurt? I'm fine, Julian said, leaning into Varian's support. I'm not running. No, Varian said, kissing the top of his head as the security teams finally swarmed the lawn to clean up the mess. You're fighting. You really are a Blackwood now. Julian looked at the three men surrounding him, a wall of muscle, violence, and undying devotion. He looked at his son, safe in Dorian's arms. The world outside was dangerous. But in here, with the wolf, the viper, and the dragon, he was untouchable. And that is how the runaway Omega tamed the beasts that hunted him. If you enjoyed seeing Julian take his stand and the triplets destroy everything for him, destroy that like button. And tell me in the comments, would you forgive a family that scared you into hiding for 3 years, or would you have made them grovel harder? I'll be reading your answers. Subscribe for the next chapter. Until then, prompt image. Prompt. Masterpiece, best quality, high-res, 1.2. Korean manhwa style, semi-realistic, digital art, for men, BL, Yaoi, Man 1. Julian, Omega, slim but resilient, messy brown hair, wearing oversized white shirt, looking vulnerable but defiant, sitting on edge of king-sized bed. Man 2. Varian, alpha, tall, silver-rimmed glasses, sharp jawline, wearing dark navy suit vest and rolled-up sleeves, standing behind Julian with possessive hand on his shoulder. Man 3. Kale, alpha, muscular build, tattoos visible on neck, wild black hair, aggressive stance, kneeling on floor between Julian's legs looking up with obsession. Man 4. Dorian, alpha, lean, elegant, wearing silk robe, holding a wine glass, leaning against bedpost with a dark smirk. Background is lavish, dimly lit master bedroom. Rain on floor-to-ceiling windows, scattered pillows, sense of tension and intimacy, dramatic lighting. Cinematic composition, sharp focus, intricate details.